All right, so 6 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. Good to be back in person, better than sitting in my basement. I'm sure everyone would agree. Not that you're all sitting in my basement, that you're all sitting in your whatever spaces. First item of business is adoption of the agenda, moved by Papa Mitchell, seconded by Katie Grigg, that the agenda be adopted as amended. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So two timed items, both right off the bat at 6 o'clock, minor variance and a zone change that we'll get to in a second. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes, moved by Grigg, seconded by Papa Mitchell, that the minutes from the February 2nd, 2022 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Were there any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And public comment period, I assume, I didn't ask Alicia, but I assume nobody submitted anything for that. Okay. So we're up to the first minor variance then, and we have Spencer and we have Mr. Thornton. So Spencer, minor variance application AO2-22 submitted by Sherry Thornton pertaining to lands described as Lot 20, Concession 4, North Oxford in the Township of Zorra. Spencer, you want to go ahead and do your report? Actually, just before we do that, just Mr. Thornton, just want to outline the process here for you, because I've skipped over something here already.
Yes.
So council's going to sit as committee adjustment. I'm going to read a motion in a minute. We're going to sit as committee adjustment. Same people, but sitting as committee of adjustment, not as council. It's a legal technicality, but it does matter. Then presentation of the report by the planner. Then the committee of adjustment will have questions for the planner. Then there will be an opportunity for you to speak if you want to. You don't have to. And then opportunity for the committee to ask you questions if they have any. And then decision by the committee of adjustment, and then we'll move out. Okay?
I'm sorry, I was having trouble understanding you there.
So we're gonna in a minute we're gonna go into committee of adjustment to hear your minor variance application, and we're gonna hear from the planner, and then the committee will ask questions of the planner if they have any, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to speak.
Yes.
And then questions for you from the committee if they have any. Then the committee will make its decision. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Moved by
Yes,
Mitchell.
and Sherry, sorry she couldn't be in on the meeting too. She's in nursing, so.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Grigg, that the council meeting be adjourned at 6:03 p.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now over to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. And Ken, good to see you on the screen there. Glad you're able to make it tonight. So the application before you tonight is an application for minor variance, and it affects property that's currently known as the Banner Schoolhouse on the west side of the 15th line north of Road 60. And what the applicant is seeking to do on this property is establish a residential addition as well as an attached garage on the subject property. After preparing some plans, they do realize they need relief from the two provisions outlined in the report. The one thing I will highlight for the committee tonight is in speaking with Ken as recently as last week, they may need a slight additional relief as it relates to the second relief for the interior side yard width. As such, I would ask that the committee consider going to 3.5 meters rather than the 4 meters that's outlined in the report and the recommendation. That in and of itself doesn't warrant additional circulation or anything. So I do mention that to assist Ken with his application here tonight. There were no comments received from neighbors other than that which has been appended to the report. I'm happy to address any questions that council may have on this matter tonight.
So just before I ask the committee for questions, I want to ask a question of clarification before we get into more questions on what you said there, Spencer. So the number that you said that the committee may want to consider changing, I'm looking at the possible motion that the committee might have, and it's the one you're talking about is the minimum interior side yard width from 7.5 to 4 meters?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. The interior side yard relief, staff have no issue with that. And in speaking with the applicant further, they may be contemplating some adjustments to the plan, which may require them to have relief to the number of 3.5 meters
you.
rather than the 4.
Thank you. That's what
So I
was
do
looking for.
ask that the committee consider that tonight, and staff are willing to recommend approval of that.
Okay. All right, so questions from the committee for Spencer? Paul?
So along that line, Spencer, the request was for 4.9, the request was for 2.46 feet on the minimum depth of the rear, but the recommendation was that we approve 4.92 feet. So are the applicants in agreement with basically 5 feet instead of 2.5 feet?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I have spoken with Ken Thornton about the recommendation that is being presented tonight. They are aware that through the building department, an absolute minimum of 4 feet is acceptable for that rear yard depth. So that number has been adjusted accordingly. But tonight I am suggesting that staff are in a position to approve or recommend approval of the additional relief for the interior side yard down to 3.5 meters.
Okay. So both of them are different than what the original request was.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, oftentimes when the variances come through, the recommendation won't always be carbon copy of what the applicant has asked for. Sometimes we may be more favorable in that number to provide some flexibility. However, in this case, we've advised the applicant that the relief is too great in one instance, such that if they were to need to paint or do minor repair work in that rear yard area, 2.5 feet is quite frankly not enough. And the building department had said that 4 feet is the minimum they would be accepting of. So that number was adjusted accordingly, and the recommendation reflects that. And then as recently as last Thursday or Friday, I spoke with Mr. Thornton, and we did mention that we would try for the 3.5 meters as it relates to the interior side yard rather than the 4, just to provide a little bit more flexibility as they go through their plans.
Okay, thanks.
Katie?
So my question is in relation to the proposed reduction of the rear yard depth. What's proposed here in the recommendation is 1.5 meters. In the letter of support from the neighbor, there was a question about whether or not there would be any impact on their ability to build along that property line in the next 12 months. Can you just speak to clarify that with the minor variance reduction of that rear yard setback, that would not, would that impact the ability for the neighbor to build something under the provisions of our zoning bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question to Councillor Davies. As council is well aware, each application will stand on its own merits. So the effect of approving the application tonight, it won't have any implications for this neighbor should he come forward in the future seeking relief himself. We have not to date seen any plans from the neighbor, so we can't speculate as to what he may or may not be proposing in the future.
Just as a follow-up, if the neighbor were to propose a structure that met the requirements of the 7.5 meter setback, there would be no need for a minor variance, as they would be compliant with the distance setback written in the bylaw. That what the setback is, if they're compliant with it, it's not impacted by the variance in the neighboring property, correct? Did I say that
Through you, Mr.
confusing?
Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Ron?
Just a point here for Spencer, and I'm quite certain I know the answer to this, but so the minor variance is to the lot line, and if the neighbor does build the barn, his minor variance is to the lot line as well in this case. Is there anything in the official plan or regarding to how close the cattle can be to the house? to the residential house. And I guess what I'm getting at is, we're allowing a minor variance here, or propose to allow a minor variance to a residential unit to be closer to the fence that has cattle immediately on the other side of the fence. So I just want to make sure there's no future issues with that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Forbes' question, there wouldn't be anything in the official plan that would speak to the grazing of cattle adjacent to property lines. It wouldn't get to that level of detail. That would likely fall under normal farm practices. However, there's nothing to indicate, at least on our end, through discussions with Mr. Thornton and the neighbor in this case, that there's any existing issue between the two properties.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Spencer? Mr. Thornton, is there anything you want to say to the committee?
I don't think really. Now, the residential part, as far as on the back, it will not be the depth of the garage, so it will not be near as close to the lot line as the garage would be. See, the depth of the addition would be 24 foot, which could be cut back if need be. It's just for one room addition for some privacy. So like I say, it will not be going as near the lot line as the garage would be.
Okay. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Thornton?
Does that help in any way?
Well, we'll see. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Thornton? So I have a question for you then. What the planning report is recommending is the minimum rear yard depth be reduced from 7.5 to 1.5 meters, and the minimum interior side yard width from 7.5 to 3.5 meters. Are those numbers acceptable to you?
Yes, because in the back, that would make it, what, in footage?
Sorry, the rear one,
Let's see how.
the rear one, instead of 24.6
Yeah,
feet,
for
would be
the rear one.
4.92 feet.
What would it take it down to?
4.92 feet.
4 point something feet?
4.92. Almost 5 feet.
Yeah, no, but, yeah, because like I went over with Spencer, worst case scenario, we could come up into the side of the schoolhouse up to 3 feet. That would bring it up to the first tall window in the schoolhouse. So if I could come up into the side of the schoolhouse 3 feet, that would make 5.5 feet then from the property line at the back.
Okay. And there's nobody from the public logged in to say anything on this or anything? Okay. All right then, if there's no other questions, moved by Forbes, seconded by Mitchell, that the Township of Zorra Committee of Adjustment approve application AO2-22 submitted by Sherry Thornton for lands described as Part Lot 20, Concession 4, North Oxford, in the Township of Zorra and municipally known as 154437 15th line, as it relates to relief from Section 6.2, Table 6.2, Limited Agricultural Zone A1 zone provisions, to reduce the minimum rear yard depth from 7.5 meters 24.6 feet to 1.5 meters 4.92 feet, and to reduce the minimum interior side yard width from 7.5 meters 24.6 feet to 3.5 meters, whatever number of feet that is, to facilitate the construction of an addition and attached garage to an existing single detached dwelling on a property zoned special limited agricultural zone A1-10 in the Township of Zorra. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So, Mr. Thornton, I would just talk to building department here, and they will let you know when you can proceed with that and exactly what you have to do to proceed with it, but I think you're good to go, okay?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 6:16. 6:16 PM, and the regular meeting of council be called back to. Oh, sorry. Spencer, can you give us your presentation on zone change application ZN 5-21-10 submitted by Cartmel Farms, care of Ian Blaine, pertaining to lands described as Lot 9, Concession 3, North Oxford in the Township of Zorra?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the application for zone change may look familiar as we recently dealt with an application for consent affecting the same property. So this is a case where the property had an accessory structure on the adjacent lands, and the adjacent landowners have come to an agreement to sell said lands to the applicant here today. It's outlined in blue there on plate 2. The entirety of the property will be about 1 acre in size post severance. And the only additional relief that I'll note, as is mentioned in the report, is a deficiency in the minimum lot depth. The applicant has just under 63 meters in lot depth as opposed to the 80 meters required under the zoning bylaw. Staff did circulate the application. There were no comments received other than those noted in the report. Nothing flagging any concerns from neighboring property owners. The application itself does represent good planning, and we are recommending approval here tonight. I do see that Peyton Shrub is also on the call here tonight if there are any questions of her. As well, I'm happy to address any questions that council may have.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions from council for Spencer? Not seeing any. The applicant there, there you are. Okay, sorry, Peyton Schraub. So do you have anything that you want to say to council about your application?
No.
Okay. And nobody here from the public to speak to this either? Okay. All right, so now moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 6:18 PM and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that the council of the Township of Zorra approve the zone change application submitted by Cartmel Farms Limited, whereby the lands described as Lot 9, Concession 3, North Oxford in the Township of Zorra are rezoned from General Agricultural Zone A2 and Limited Agricultural Zone A1 to Special Rural Residential Zone RR-24. Does anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, just check in with Spencer and or Mike. There's a waiting period and stuff, and so just check in with them. They'll make sure you follow all that stuff, and then you'll be ready to go, okay? See ya. All right, and now we're down to no delegations, so reports from staff. 8.1, Fire Department. 8.1A, Report 2022-039 from the Fire Chief regarding consultation, draft firefighter certification training regulation framework. Chief, what do you want to highlight for council on that?
Just in preliminary for your information report at this point, it was announced the end of January. It's open for consultation until the end of February, and then we will go from there.
Questions from council on this report? Paul?
No questions, but a comment the chief may or may not want to respond to, and it's just that my comment is that training requirements are a balancing act for part-time fire departments, and the balancing is between competency and training time. And obviously, the more training time you put in, the more competent you are, the better ability you have to do the job. But if the pendulum swings too far the other way, you run into recruitment and retainment problems, because these are part-time firefighters. They have jobs and lives to carry on, and if you require too much of them, and for each person, what too much is a different definition, but I just wanted to put that out there, and I do look forward to the full report that you're going to be bringing to us.
I wholeheartedly agree on that. I think we have to go back to the priorities of family, work, fire, and they are part-time firefighters. This is the legislation being asked, and it's our job to be creative in finding the path through it. I think there's room to give feedback, and I'm prepared to do so if there's feedback that we'd like to give as a municipality or as a county. And I think that is the balancing act to find in terms of qualified versus certified and valuing the expertise in our senior firefighters, not just those with their certificate.
Anyone else? I mean, I think we should, I've talked to the chief about this, and I totally agree. I mean, you know, the example I always use to people is, you know, if you ask the simple question, do you want all the firefighters to be trained as much as possible and they show up to your house for an emergency, the answer would be yes. Well, what if that meant there was only 3 of them? Well, no, right? So, I mean, I think we should be writing to the minister, to the provincial government, to say that we do have specific concerns. I think, you know, whether that's a letter that the mayor signs at the bottom or whatever, I would suggest to council that we should, I think that it's unlikely we are going to get them to change their mind on this legislation in its entirety, but I think it would be irresponsible if we think it's not a good thing for our residents and the service that we give them. I think it would be irresponsible for us not to say so. Ultimately, it's up to them if they want to go ahead and do it anyway. But if there's specific suggestions the chief has around timelines to achieve this, or specific exemptions that would make it easier to be implemented on the ground in rural communities, I think we should give that feedback. And again, if they choose not to do it, that's their call. But if we don't even tell them, then that's on us. So if council's okay, I mean, I don't know whether you want to pass a resolution to say to do it, or if you're comfortable with the chief and I writing a letter or whatever, it's up to you. But in my opinion, we should be giving feedback on this. If we think there's a possibility that it's going to cause us issues with either service delivery and or recruitment and retention, I think we should. But Paul.
Yeah, I would go along with that. The chief knows more at this point about what is actually required here and the time. I know Zorra is way ahead of a lot of departments on our training. And we've had quite a turnover in the last 5 or 8 years. So during the time when all our new recruits required that basic training, and a lot of them have taken advanced training. But I can vouch for that the more training, and especially leadership training, is crucial to the fire service. So I would leave it to the chief and the mayor to determine whether what they are asking for is unreasonable, and if they think it is, to voice our concerns. Because I have for many years had concern that we're missing out on good people because they just can't commit the time to do this training.
Absolutely. You bet. You bet.
If there's nothing else, then moved by Forbes, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2022-039 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Anybody have anything else for the chief that was not in that report? Then we have 8.1B, report 2022-040 from the fire chief regarding joint fire prevention officer position. Chief, do you want to highlight anything in that report?
This was a project started prior to me becoming chief that I've carried through with the other RIFSOC municipal chiefs. Looking at the community risk assessment that was completed, it identified the need for a fire prevention officer. I've highlighted that in the business case and then again in the report itself. At this point, we are meeting the bare minimum, but will, as we grow, and there's certainly more that we can be doing, so this is the tool for us to accomplish that.
Questions for the chief on that report? Rob?
I'm always leery when we start adding more people all the time, and we do it with the very best intentions, but we always have to think about what we're doing. I mean, we've added, we were doing the joint RIFSOC training. That's good. Now we're putting prevention officer position or proposed prevention officer system. And I mean, maybe it's leading us down the right road, but I'm thinking it's leading us to one county chief and one county fire department, similar to the EMS. And I mean, it's a slow procedure, and if that's the road we think we want to go down, and having fire prevent or having a prevention officer position, I mean, I don't know what the workload is in that. I guess I'm asking is that not something our full-time chief can do? So.
Absolutely, that at this point does fall on me. Because we are meeting the minimum, we do it on request, complaint, or on any code violation that's been brought to our attention or we witnessed. The more present we are, the more we find of those. And I've been turning up enough and following up, and I can see the need that it will start taking a significant amount of time. At this point, we don't have a dedicated team of certified volunteers within, so it does land on me. Manageable, but as we grow, likely will continue. I don't see it as a centralized move. At this point, all of us are managing individually. I see it as a way to standardize and provide a better level of service. It would be things like our municipal facilities would be getting inspections, coordinating some of our prevention activities, and really standardizing some of the things rather than all doing it in silos.
Anyone else? Paul?
Two questions, Chief. What's the tracking system that'll be in place to ensure that if this is a five-way partnership, that we get 20% of the work done?
Yeah, so we're proposing at this point looking at a rotating schedule. Every fifth day would be for each municipality. Perfect world, that would be Monday in Zorra, Tuesday at the next one, Wednesday, but with the holidays, and it doesn't shake out quite that nice. So we would just rotate through. In the event that the prevention officer was tied up in a court case, taking several days, we would then manage rescheduling those days such that they would balance. If a municipality found that they needed more of that time, we could share and purchase the time allotted. The position will be hosted in EZT, just like the training officers hosted currently in Norwich. So they would ultimately be responsible for the scheduling and managing, and then they would answer to the chiefs in terms of the needs.
And other question, it mentions in there about inspections of what are listed as vulnerable occupancy. So I just wondered, how many vulnerable occupancies do we have in Zorra?
This time, none. So vulnerable occupancy is defined as a care and treatment home or a facility requiring extra need. And the reason those are a high concern for fire safety is because the people often need assistance exiting. So they have to do a fire drill annually that's witnessed by the chief fire official. Again, I suspect we're a little bit ahead of the curve, but it's only a matter of time before those start arriving and being in Zorra. And then in which case that would take up a considerable amount of time.
Anyone else? I'm very supportive of this. I think the best emergency to respond to is the one that never happens, and this is in line with that. It may take more than a year to start to see any kind of reduction in responses, but I think this is a good thing if we can do this. So it seems to me like a good plan. So. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Grigg, that report 2022-021 from the fire chief be received and filed, and that the council approves in principle the concept of a partnership for a joint fire prevention officer on condition that all 5 rural fire services of Oxford County members participate, and that the 2022 operating budget includes up to $12,000 for this position, with any excess costs coming from the Zorra Fire and Emergency Services operating budget. Anybody want to speak to that? Paul?
Yeah, I share Ron's concern whenever there's a request for more staff, but I think once I read this report, I think this is good value for the dollars that we're going to spend. We have had previous partnerships, and when Ron referred to the joint training officer, I actually voted against that, and I'll admit that turned out better than I thought it would. So there's a long list of possible responsibilities that were included for this position, and I don't think there's any way that this officer is going to take on all those responsibilities. Each chief is going to pick and choose one or two or three things where the outside help comes into play and is going to be the most benefit to each department. The one thing that I noticed was on the list was working on pre-plans and water source mapping, and that was something I chaired a committee about 10 years or so ago, trying to come up with some pre-plans. It's very intensive work to do that. At that time, it kind of fell by the wayside, so I would hope that that's something we can get back into doing. So that's why I support that we go into it. I think the report said that it would take approximately 6 months to get the person hired and into position, and that's why I put in about the dollar number, and also the condition that it has to be a five-way partnership. Otherwise, the numbers start to change, and I don't think that, knowing how RIFSOC works, I think that's not going to be a problem. So.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And I think that's it, Chief, right? Yep. Thank you. Recreation, no items. Matt is here. Does anybody have any, like, non-report, like, update questions for Matt? No? Okay. Building and drainage, no. So 8.4A, Public Works Department, Report 2022-036 from the Director of Public Works regarding the results of tender 2022-02 for one new 3/4 ton pickup truck and recommendations. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight in that report?
Yes. No, just one thing I'd like to say. There was 3 manufacturers I noted in my report that reviewed the tender. I reached out to the 2 that didn't submit a bid just to see if there's something on the tenders that isn't desirable to these bidders that we could change to try to get more, a little more, bids submitted. So I didn't get a response from the one, but I did the other, and it was just an error on their end. He had the bid all ready to go and just missed the deadline to submit it. So that's kind of unfortunate. And I didn't ask him how much the bid was because I really didn't want to know. So. That's all I have to date on that one.
Any questions for Steve on that report? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Mitchell, that council direct staff to purchase one 2022 Ford F-250 for the tendered price of $56,573 plus tax. Anybody want to speak to that? All's in favor? Oh, did you want to speak to it, Steve?
Yeah, well, that's always a good question, especially right now. He indicated here, if we have the order in by February 20th, that the manufacturer date would be in August, and with delivery near to the fall. So, fingers crossed. Yeah, we're still waiting on one we ordered last year, so somewhere in Idaho.
No chips.
Yeah, that's the issue with the one that's still, we're waiting on it, sitting without a chip. Yeah.
All's in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And report 2022-033 from the Director of Public Works regarding a construction update of the Zorra maintenance facility. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight in that?
Not too much. I think it's pretty much up to date. The masons will be finished up doing all the block walls inside the administration building. We've finished up on Friday, so we're in pretty good shape. Lots of action going on there today.
Questions for Steve on that report? Steve?
Can you fill us in any more on that? How real is it?
Well, it's pretty real, unfortunately. The biggest issue is the ground conditions below 200 feet. He's encountering large boulders that if he's hitting the boulders dead on with the drill, he can go through them. It's not an issue. It's when he's nudging by them, it's moving them, and when he removes the casing, it's moving back against the geothermal lines that are looped down into the hole, and it's pinching them off. They have to date one of them right now. They're unsure about another one, so unfortunately, this is something kind of unforeseen. They did do their research and collected a lot of drill records from the area, from other well drillers, and but unfortunately, most of the drills in the area don't exceed much more than 200 feet to know what's below that, and these go down to 425, so there's a lot of unknowns.
Any other questions on it? Paul?
Steve asked the question that I had, but to me, I'm certainly not happy with the numbers that are involved here, but I'm less bothered by this turn of events than some of the other things that should have been caught. And it appears that they did their due diligence, and it just that this is a technology that's not that common, and we've run into an issue, unfortunately. I still think we made the right decision going with the green energy option, just because the price of fossil fuels has skyrocketed and continues to skyrocket. But just the problem with the technology that we're going to have to live with, and I just to comment on that.
And I agree with you, Paul. I mean, and that's, as much as we don't like extra costs, this is one thing the contingencies are in place for, the unknowns. And, this was nobody's error. This is just something nobody really could foresee happening. So, that's one thing a contingency is meant for, these type items, not so much mistakes on other ends. I agree.
Anything else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that report 2022-033 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
And if I could, Mr.
Yep.
Mayor, one side note, they're ready for us anytime to go on our tour. So if council could let me know what dates work within the next week or week and a half, I can coordinate that. And
Do that now? Do we want to do a doodle poll later? What do we want to do? Something? Yeah. Paul?
Well, we're all here. I would think after next council meeting in 2 weeks, it's a morning meeting, and if everybody's got some time in the afternoon.
No, it's fine. That's.
That's true. We all are here on Wednesday,
Yeah.
March 2nd. After that, what do we know what that agenda looks like? I guess it doesn't really matter. When it's done.
Yeah.
When it's done, we'll go.
Yeah, no, that works excellent.
That's the working plan for now.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep, I have all the PPE all lined up, so it's just you have to bring some footwear that's got safety
Steel
toes.
toes.
So, but everything else I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Thanks, Paul. That was good.
Yeah,
No,
those will work.
I stopped in on the way on the way down, and it really starts to look like something. And the sand building, it looks gigantic compared to what we had before. So
Yeah, they're making good progress now. It's funny. It's nice to see some lots of work going on there. No holdups. They're making good progress. The overhead crane was installed the last couple days, and it's just waiting for hydro. So, we're starting to see some excellent progress in there. It's starting to shape up. I'm not there yet. There's like I say, there's always going to be hurdles, and this one's had its fair share, and I know we're not through the woods yet, but yeah, it's nice to see progress when there's hurdles. That's for sure.
I'm thinking last Friday you really wished it was open with the conditions you guys were dealing with that.
You're not wrong, Paul.
Okay, then, that's it from Public Works. Thanks, Steve. 8.5, Finance Department, 2 reports. So 8.5A, report 2022-034 from the Director of Finance regarding the draft 2022-2026 5-year capital budget. Diane, I'll turn it over to you, and I'm going to suggest to council that we do this fairly casually and basically however Diane wants to do it. So you step us through the budget, and it's up to you to tell us, do you want us to interrupt you with questions? Do you want to hold the questions to the end, or whatever you want to do? I'll largely turn it over to you at this point. I will say to council, the one thing will be, Diane and Karen and I talked about this before, and if, as long as we're asking for relatively simple changes to come back, maybe, you know, as possible changes, they'll just take that as direction to staff and come back. If you guys start to get it all kind of complicated, or 17 options or scenarios, then I will sort of say, okay, somebody's got to write something down here, and you got to get support of council before we send Diane off to do that. And I promised her that I would do that, so that's what we're going to do. So I'll turn it over to you to run this portion however you want to run it, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. What we'll do is we'll just go through the report right now, and then we'll go right into the budget, and we'll go screen by screen, just a general overhead. I'll ask the questions if you have any questions on each screen, and we can address those questions. And I have a fantastic team with me that are going to help me out and to answer any questions that I may not be able to. So this budget that's being presented to council for 2022 is seeing an increase of $154,348. It's 5.5% of an increase. That is also taking into account that we are going to be utilizing some of the capital levy reserve. It's not as much as the previous year, but we'll be using $432,000 to bring it down to the 5.5. It's less than the previous year, which we utilized $686,454. There is a set amount of $1,233,000 left in that reserve, and this budget shows that over the next 5 years, we'll be utilizing all of those funds with a consistent 5.5 over the next 5 years, basically. Okay, with the intent that in the 6th year, we will have the majority of our debentures paid off, so that will reduce our levy, so we won't need that transfer from reserves as much anymore. Now, what else? Okay, part of the report also provides council just an idea of some of the costs that we're incurring over the next year due to the pandemic. So we provided an example of equipment and how much the rate has increased on equipment purchases. Also material costs, especially with AC on the asphalt, and the large increase that is being experienced for January. And then we just found out, and I've also provided in here, is your cost of living increase. Now, we just found out that the cost of living from January to January ends up to be 5.7% for Ontario. So this is all based on Ontario rates, okay? So when you look at a 5.5, it's in relation to the cost of living, okay? That's all I have within that actual document and the report that I presented to council. Is there any questions on the report that I have just presented?
Not directly, but just a question that I sent you about where we ended up last year with the capital budget, and I know the numbers were inflated because of the ZMF project, but did we come up with a surplus or deficit, or we're going into this capital?
Yes, so right now we have projects that are not completed, that they'll be being transferred into reserves and carried over to 2022, that will take out of reserves to help to finish those projects off. But in the end, we did save money on a few other projects, so we'll have a little bit of a surplus, okay? So instead of carrying the full 86,000 that we needed from the capital levy, it's going to be more like 450,000 so far, unless there's any surprise invoices that come across that I haven't received yet. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. So if we go into the 5-year capital budget, and the first slide we have is just speaks about the 5-year capital plan and how Zorra has started with the 5-year capital plan since 2016, so that you can see the overall, how it affects the municipality over the next 5 years. The ideas, as I work with staff, we are going to look at expanding it to a 10-year capital plan, just so we can understand the assets and the life cycle and where we need to start looking at how those assets are going to fit into the whole picture and keep our levy from a roller coaster effect, okay? If we go to the
Question-
next.
Just a
Okay.
question on that slide, Diane. So I love that idea of going from 5-year to 10-year. Why not 15? Or would we ultimately go, okay.
And what it is more it's an internal document for staff, right? And we would start off with a 10, and going to 15, 20 would be great, okay? Especially when you're looking at fire apparatus, and that's a 20-year lifespan, right? So the idea is to get that fully, see one apparatus go right through to the end. So we know how much money do we have to put in reserves to be able to fund that. So that's something I've been having discussions with staff already on.
And similar then for roads where like a surface treatment lasts 20 whatever years, then the idea would be to ultimately get, at least as an internal working document, to a point where we paved it and in 22 years or whatever, we're gonna have to, okay, thank you.
Yes. And that's explained in this one. So in this slide, we're actually looking at some of the different studies that we're using to prepare the budget, okay? And this is what we have used in the past and we're continuing with, okay? And this is our appendix to the slides that we've got, of all the different slides that are in this budget, okay? And this one's just an overall, so this is like just your 5-year, what is the expenses gonna look like in 5 years, and what's the total of your funding sources, and the utilizing of the full capital levy reserve, okay? This, the next slide, table 2 then, actually shows you the expenses and your revenue sources and how they compare year to year, and trying to keep our trend where it's stable, and we're just looking at a straight 5.5 basically across the board. When we get to 2026, it's a little higher right now, and we'll keep looking at different options on how we can bring that down too. And that's something that, it's a little bit further out of reach, and we haven't really discussed it enough with staff, but we know it's there, and something will have to be done, okay? And remember, maybe there'll be grants by then that we'll be able to use. Okay? So the next slide actually highlights some of the work that's going to be done over the next 5 years within the township. Is there any questions so far on any of the slides? Okay. And so once again, this just budget is telling us that we're looking at a 5.5%, and that it's consistent across to all 5 years, and that the majority of the increase is due to the purchase of the new equipment. Also that we have continue with debenture payments until the 6th year, at which point it will decrease by $243,000. The debenture payments that are in here do not at this time include the ZMF building, okay? So, but that's already been taken into consideration, so, okay. And as I work with Public Works, on a side note, we do have that funds from MNR, and we right now utilize about $600,000 a year, but at some years we may not need as much, and other years we may use a little bit more, but then we can keep that consistency across the board.
And that
Okay?
M&R money is the aggregate royalties, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. There is a splash pad scheduled for Embro. The price has gone up a little bit higher than it was originally slated for, but we also are looking at a grant opportunity with it. And not within the report, and it was missed, and I'll have to put it in, is the development charges that we'll be able to put against it. Okay, and I think it's roughly, what was it, 15,000 or something like that, 11,000, okay? So that'll help fund a little bit of it too, Okay. The modernization funds, there's 61,000 coming from that, and that's going to be towards the purchase of a budget software, also more efficiencies to be put into place for staff, and I'm looking at, instead of generating physical checks to pay our vendors, we're looking at electronic funds transfers, implementing that. Also, we're looking at sending tax bills out electronically, usually using the more electronic functions out there, reducing paper, postage, that kind of stuff. So we should see savings in that end, but it's going to be a big learning curve for our residents, and that positivity attitude that we have to present to them so that but still know that we're here for them, and if they need a printed copy, we can still do that. But that's something that we'll be transitioning over to, and making that available. Okay. In the reserves, and I'll make a note of it here, the reserves show that there's still funds in the modernization. It's a little bit more than originally thought so. When we're done with the budgets software and some of the efficiencies, we'll bring it down to zero. Because I have slated in the reserves, that's still 122 in there, but in 2021, we utilized SharePoint and sound equipment. So that reduces it by 60,000 in 2021. So there's only 61,000 left. So I would utilize it all.
Just a point on that. We haven't been able to participate in any grant programs for modernization funding because we still had money in reserve. So the last 2 years there have been grant programs. So anything coming in the future, if we do come up with ideas, we would be able to submit for funding requests as long as the grants are still out there.
Okay, and this slide outlines many of the projects that are scheduled throughout the municipality at various parks and recs and facilities. And as we can see, there's a lot on there, very aggressive list of projects. Okay, so what we did this year in the budget was actually give a detail of the 5-year capital plan for each of the departments. So right now we're looking at roads. And this kind of gives you an idea of how much taxation dollars is needed each year, along with the various funding. Staff have a separate little entity that you don't see, which is actually, they'll have another table that includes the reserves, so that they always know what reserves are available for them to use and what reserves need to be strengthened. Okay? Is there any questions on any of the road projects?
Yeah, I sent Steve actually 5 questions on roads and, well, it was 2 questions on roads and 3 on bridges. So if I can, and first of all, I want to say thank you to Diane and Steve and Matt. I sent no surprise, I sent a whole lot of questions to them, and they emailed me back over the last 2 days with some really good detailed information, and I really appreciate that going in. So for public consumption, I'm asking the same questions again. And one of the things that we did very early in this term that I'm very proud of was to come up with the roads improvement plan so that residents out there know where their road, because everybody, it's their road, is on the list. But I also recognize that it's a living document and it gets changed over time. And so I went back to last year's capital budget and I compared it to this year's capital budget, and there's a lot of changes, and Steve has given the answer. So just, first of all, line 15, last year was budgeted $565,000. It's gone to $628,000 for 11% increase. Road 92 went from 315 to 328 for a 4% increase, and the 5 combined streets in Thamesford went from 221,000 to 273,000 for a 23% increase. So I'm just wondering why the different increases in those 3 different projects.
The 15th line, staff has recognized a lot of pedestrian cycling traffic out on the 15th line from Thamesford. That with a few traffic calming requests and issues that have arose over the last couple of years. So staff thought it a good addition that we'd widen the platform as much as possible there and try to achieve an 8-meter wide platform on that section of road to accommodate more of a pedestrian lane. That combined with the 3-meter lane with the white lines that we're starting with this year should give a nice little buffer there between the traveling public and the pedestrian and cycling traffic out there. I think would increase safety and would be a good addition. It's very similar to what we did on Road 92 by Lakeside in 2019, and it's been very well received out there. So I think it's a good addition that that we added in there, and that would make up the bulk of the 11% increase in that project alone, and of course the addition of the white lines on the edge lines, and of course the asphalt increases this year that are predicting are unfortunately going up as well. So it's something we have to try to account for best we can. Road 92, there was a smaller increase, just mostly for the projected increase of the hot mix asphalt and the addition of the 2 outer white edge lines. The 5 Thamesford streets, so the majority of the increase in cost there is for the addition of some curbing on Delater Street down the hill. We've been over the years experienced a lot of water issues and water running onto private property down in that area. So we thought during the, doing this project, we'd add some curbing down there to better direct the water to the catch basins that are already in place there. So that makes up for a large part of that extra cost there.
But, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
When you say delayed or down the hill, delayed or east or west of river?
It's east of the river.
Okay. Okay, cool.
And that's why I asked the questions, because I know there's a good reason why these, and, so my other question on roads, and then I'll let it go till we get to the slide on bridges, is Banner Road wasn't scheduled for any work for until at least after 2025, so I wonder why it's been moved up into this year's budget.
So that's a good question, and it really hasn't been moved up as far as replacement asphalt. This is just a surface treatment we're planning on for this section of road. Over the last couple of years during our crack sealing program, we've done that entire road. We just finished it up last year, the last half of it. So it's always good practice after crack sealing is to get a good surface treatment on there to better preserve that road until we can project that full replacement. So surface treatment will always give us another 6 to 10 years in life expectancy, just to prolong the longevity of that road. It sees a lot of high traffic out there, especially truck traffic, and all the construction that we know is ongoing in Thamesford for the subdivisions. And that's one of the reasons why we suggested to put in this the FiberMats surface treatment. It gives a better load carrying for the type of traffic it's experiencing. It's a product we've used in the past on our Road 60 and our 35th line near Emerald, and it's held up very well. It's performed really well. So I think for the little extra cost of this surface treatment, it's going to be a good addition and give us a better end result. And hopefully we can push that section of road back maybe a couple of years in the future. This stuff we look at when the time comes. So.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
So just as a follow-up on that one, so the idea there then would be that by pulling actually this portion of rehabilitation on Banner ahead, we may push back further a more expensive part.
Yes, and that's
potentially,
the
yeah.
hope. It's all about pavement
Yeah.
preservation. It's something I'm going to try to strengthen over the next few years, is get a better pavement preservation program, with crack sealing and then surface treatment. And there's lots of different other products coming out for surface treatment. There's microfiber. There's and there's lots of little things that are always being added as this stuff progresses. But we're always looking at all of them, what's best fits, and the condition of the road. If it's savable, then we're going to do what we can to save it and prolong it as much as we can.
And just to bring all that asset management into it, that's your life cycle. So that's an event that extends your life cycle strategy. And so then that helps us to financially be sustainable. Okay? Okay. Is there any other questions on the roads component of those 5 years? If not, we'll go right into bridges. Now, there's a number of bridges that we have not been able to complete in 2021, so they'll be moving into 2022, and we'll have a large funding from the gas tax to be able to fund that bridges, so, okay. Questions?
Yeah, 3 questions on bridges for Steve. The 2 that Diane just mentioned that we didn't do last year because basically we ran out of time was bridge number 280, and the price on it has been adjusted from 122,000 to 218,000. But bridge 330 is still at 355,000 for last year to this year. So I wondered why one went way up and the other one is staying the same.
So Bridge 280, last year, when we budget these prices, we get them from our biannual reports, and they've got an estimated cost for the repairs. Once we plan on this work, we hire an outside source, in this case it's K-Smart, and they come in and do a detailed review of what's necessary for this bridge to actually bring it to the tender stage. And when they do that, they always, it's quite often we find that there's more issues, and that was the case in this one last year. So when they got the detailed reports on it, we found that there were some more issues that some more deficiencies that need to be addressed, and also some provincial requirements to upgrade the railing, so that would add to the cost as well. So that was the 2 main contributors why that went up. On Bridge 33, there was no, when we had that in detailed study done by K-Smart, they projected that this cost, I had reached out to them before I put this budget number in there just to ask if there would be much of an increase in this, and they felt pretty confident that this amount should hold, so fingers crossed.
Okay.
I don't want to come back and ask for more.
Bridge 130 and bridge was scheduled for this year, and Bridge 120 was scheduled for 2024, and both at 332,000. Now they're in the budget for just both for this year, but just for studies. So I wondered why the change of tactics on those 2 bridges.
Yeah, so, okay, that's kind of brings us back to Bridge 280 and the unknowns. So some of these larger structures, both of these structures, 130 and 120, span over the Wildwood Lake, and they're very large structures. In the past, when we've come across these large structures and we get into the tendering, getting information to tender through K-Smart, we don't want any surprises. So a detailed study, which includes a deck condition survey where they do actually take cores and they find the actual condition of the deck, gives us a real good idea of what that cost is going to be in real time, and that way it allows us to budget accurately and plan that in the next year or 2 to get those structures fixed up properly.
And that makes sense since they're both close together, both over to do them the same time rather than
That's correct.
a year
They're both
apart.
similar in age and similar in issues. We ran into this issue in 2019 on another bridge structure, and it come back, it was going to be way more than we budgeted for. So we ended up, following through the bridge deck condition survey, got an actual price of what this was going to cost to fix, and then we figured it out for the next year's budget. So those numbers actually worked out, and we came in under budget on those. So it's important to know that when they do the biannual inspections, they can't really see inside the bridge until we get these detailed inspections done to know what the actual issues are.
And my last question is bridge number 540 was scheduled for 2023 at 698,000. It's been moved up to 2022 at the same price. So given the expected increases, why is it still budgeted at the same price?
Yeah. So when K-Smart, we had a bridge deck condition survey done on this one, and I planned on this in the budget once I got their results back and their projected costs. I kind of planned this to be done in 2023 at that cost. So they projected that cost with the interest or the increase over the next couple of years at the chose not to lower that cost just for a one-year adjustment, just in case there is any unknowns. Hopefully we come a little above on that one, so we're okay. Yeah, that was the main reason why there was no adjustment on that.
Thanks, Steve. I know there's always good reasons why these decisions are made, and we just see the final numbers, so I really appreciate the background of why those numbers are in there. Okay, thanks.
And just as an addition to what Paul just said, it also gives us better insight into how wide and how deep you're considering as you bring us, this budget, that you're looking at traffic calming request forms and safety and cycling, and that we have an opportunity to make some changes at time of construction is the most cost-effective way for us to get those improvements made for residents. So lots of opportunities. I mean, I don't have the level of interest in that amount of detail for Steve, but it is interesting to listen to have a better understanding of how, like I said, how wide and how deep you are considering with all of this. So thank you.
So I would, if I could just make a comment there, because I think it's really appropriate. I think that so first of all, absolutely all of that, and I think the budget that we've got here, and like what you're pointing out, the level of detail that staff have gotten into is excellent. I'm very happy with it. I would also suggest to council there's a lesson for us in this too, in that we're seeing back from staff the result of policy decisions that we've made. In other words, when we give staff clear direction about road needs study, traffic calming and stuff, it actually then gets reflected in the budget that we get back. And what starts to happen is we start to look at the budget and sort of say, this has the things in it that I thought I wanted to see in it, and so there it is, and okay, there it is. So to me, this is the way it's supposed to be done. We actually just pass policy level documents, and then staff say, okay, thanks, now I know what you want, now I will plan accordingly, right? I mean, a bridge, a rec hall, but ultimately the overall budget. So I think there's a real lesson for us in that too, that if we do it right, it actually works for them, and when it works for them, it works for us, and when it works for all of us, then it should be working for residents in the end, that you have actually, a budget with value in it, not just dollars in it. So, sorry, but I just thought that was particularly relevant to what we were saying there. So back over to you, Diane.
Okay, is there any other questions with bridges? No? Okay, we'll go on. The next one will be vehicles and buildings, and it's on the roadsides. And part of this budget is that you'll see there's a transfer to reserves. Okay, and that's how we fund all our new vehicles, is through the reserve. So we put so much money into reserves. So what I have added in here is an increase to the reserves on an annual basis. And right now, it's just a 2%. It's not even close to cost of living increases that we're experiencing, but it's something, because we are seeing that increase in equipment purchases, and we need to adjust that reserve on an annual basis. Okay, so you'll see that in this document. Is there any questions on the vehicle component? I do not like that. And if there's no questions, it's the same with fire. The fire equipment's the same thing, so we're showing that we're slowly increasing that also. The fire side is where we will be taking, staff are seriously looking at a further, like a 10-year capital plan, a 15, because the apparatus that we're going to be purchasing over the next 20 years, they're big dollars. And we have to make sure we're able to purchase it. There'll be some serious discussions with staff on that and what kind of apparatus we want to have to service the municipality and still meet the needs. So that's still an ongoing discussion. Right now, it's feasible, but later on there'll be challenges.
Challenges. So in terms of that, the way,
It'll be the number of vehicles,
Yeah.
apparatus, in the short time
Okay.
span. And The amount that's going into reserves
Yeah.
will not cover
Yeah.
those purchases.
Okay.
That's where we're going to,
Okay, I'll leave it there.
yeah. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, we can go right to table 7, which is then recreation, and there's lots of projects going on in recreation. Is there any questions on the rec side?
Four questions for Matt. First one, what's the small dog area at Grace Patterson Park, and why is it included in this budget?
So the small dog area of Grace Patterson Park would be to include a partitioned area of the existing park space for small dogs. This is a resident request, and not just a single resident, but from several residents that have come through to staff this past year for that park. There are fairly common at dog parks that, so for small breed dogs or young dogs, they have a space where they don't have to kind of be impeded by larger animals. So this is something has been requested, and we've got an estimate, so basically to partition that area as well as rework the entrance fencing and gates so that they kind of have separated entrances as they come into the park.
The Road 66 trail, is that a brand new trail, or is it an improvement on an existing trail?
It would be a new township trail. Sometimes you might call them a desire line. That there's people that currently walk this trail. They've beat the path down. They've started to do this on their own, but it would make it an actual township trail, where there's currently a bit of a pathway by residents. Yeah, exactly.
And Diane alluded to it earlier, but the budgeted price for the Ambrose splash pad's gone from $250,000 to $355,000. Now, it doesn't impact our contribution to it. It's still set at $75,000. I just wonder why the price has gone up. Is that just an are they going to do something bigger, or is it just we expect higher construction costs?
So the original goal, was $250 was the original budget with $175,000 in fundraising goal for the committee. They raised $230,000. We also were successful in a $50,000 Trillium grant. We were awarded that in January. So with those two items, I looked at this and looked at current construction costs, as well as we're going through this through an RFP process. So we set the budget and they make the design for us. So to try and give them the best possible product for there, and to factor in the fact of increased construction costs since we looked at this originally in 2019 budget, when we started to include this in the forecast. That's why I chose to increase the budget but remain with the same portion contributed from Zorra capital funds.
So that's a real good news story that,
Yeah.
that they're fundraising, and we've mentioned this before, their fundraising in a pandemic went well beyond, plus we were able to get a significant grant so that they can do, if possible, bigger than better than what the original plan was. And my last question is not directly to the budget, but it has to do with recreation spending, and that was the paving project of the Don Knox Trail, which once we got into it, found out that there was some underlying issues. I don't believe the township had any money committed to it, but I just wondered what's the status of that project and whether they'll be coming back to us again.
They could come back to township for that request again. So as you mentioned, that project started to proceed. As we started to dig initial kind of test holes, we realized that the base underneath wasn't suitable to support the paving on top. At that point, we put on a kind of, with no time limit, hold or kind of pause or stop the project. The project's still there in the kind of the minds of the community members, definitely with the line specifically. They actually would like to even increase the trails inside South Park. When I talked to them about that, though, there's currently, the park's bounded, or kind of has 4 streets around it, and 3 of those streets are connected through a trail. So it has a good connection in that park, and we have other parks where we don't have connections, so I'm trying to prioritize the parks which don't have connections, and this in the south end of this Road 66 road allowance is providing a connection for community, instead of improving that existing trail currently, so.
I'm glad Matt explained the Ambrose splash pad because I was having kittens when I read that line. I was thinking the community fundraising went way over the top. Then we got the Ontario Trillium grant and I'm going, yeah. And then I look at this and I'm going, oh my God. So I'm just saying thank you for explaining what you did.
I had two recreation-related questions for Diane. One was the budgeting for the new trail shows $23,676 from development charges. So can you just, I know there's some strict rules on what we can use development charges funds for. Is that amount of money transferable to some other project if we decided not to do that trail, or if you can just kind of, it's still a bit of a gray area for me how development charges, what we can and can't do with them.
Nope, that's okay. So there was a study done in 2019, and development charges are for growth, for anything new that is due to the growth of your community and your municipality. So what I've done in the budget, and I maybe should not have because it's too confusing, and is actually what we did was just take an average. So we know we get so much money in development charges for parks and rec over the next 5 years. So that's just an average amount over all 5 years, when in reality that portion may be $3,000 for the trail, it's $11,000 for the splash pad, it's $12,000 for I think what else is there? There's, pardon me? Playgrounds, yes, that's right. So thank you very much. So, but the problem is that the trail, it's 2.8 kilometers that it's utilized for, but we may only use 800 meters this year. It might be 1,000 next year, sort of thing. So what I've done is just lumped it all together. So what I can do is update the document to show it actually being segregated amongst the various projects that were outlined in the 2019 study. Okay, does that help?
That makes sense. So so the 23,000 is just put in there as a holding number, and you'll come back with it divided up, because that does make an impact on, that was one of the, later on when I started picking this apart, that was one of the things that I thought about we could maybe not go forward with. So my other question is, we had committed $13,000 to AJ Baker Home and School for playground equipment. It's not in the capital budget, so I assume that's operating. If you could just explain.
That's correct. So it's a grant that we will be giving to this school, and once that asset's been purchased, it goes to the school board. So we will not own that asset because it's on the property of the school board. So we're basically just turning and giving them a grant to put towards that purchase. So it'll be under the operating.
Okay, thank you.
In the year 2023, dramatic. We have the multi-use courts project. I just lost it.
It's in 24, I
24,
believe.
that's why. So dramatic and then incredibly incorrect. In the year 2024, we have a $350,000 500 multi-use courts, with the municipal portion being $105,000. Is that for the full scope of what was proposed by the committee? Because we were also given some secondary options that if council didn't want the full scope, then the numbers would be different. Are the numbers that we're seeing here, those are reflective of the full scope of proposed project?
Yes, so that has the full scope of the project from their last meetings where they've discussed whether changing or updating the project. They haven't looked at reducing the cost of the total cost of it, but maybe changing which portions, like how it's allocated inside the project. So instead of doing surfacing, keeping the number of courts as full as they wanted to, but doing less surfacing. So when we look at, we're not setting in stone what they are going to construct, but we believe that if they take option A of kind of reconfiguring it to do this type of part of the project, the costing's going to stay similar. So they still have time to work on that, but we're putting this amount in that we required to do the kind of project so they can just make some options of how they're going to finish the project, but the costing should be similar at the top end.
Just more of a compliment, and we'll go back to the year 2023, where it says equipment. I'm happy to see that it says electric pickup truck instead of just pickup truck, because I think we've been lagging a little bit on getting that part of our fleet under wraps, and so I like to see that heading anyways. Hopefully we follow through.
And if I may make a note on that, like really, currently we have 3 pickup trucks in recreation, and one of them we will be getting a replacement from Public Works as we wait for their tender to come in. We could use a 4th this year, but I'm deferring that 4th truck because I think commercially we'll be able to see pickup trucks available that meet our needs in that year instead of in this calendar year.
Okay. We'll continue on then, and we're into reserves. Okay. So there's a number of reserves that are set aside. There's reserve funds, and the township is working on a policy for reserves, and we'll hope to have that to council again in 2022 for further discussion. Okay. What we have seen in the reserves and the reserve funds is that there's a steady decrease of the reserves, but then again, it's increasing for 2025 and 26, which is a good story. We do continue to see a shortfall in recreation reserves by the end of 2026, so that will have to be addressed on how we'll be able to fund those projects if they're still to continue from reserves. So it either means that we increase the transfer of reserves or we have to find funds from somewhere else to be able to fund those projects.
Oh, wait a second.
Okay. Okay. Part of the reserves also activity shows that we'll be closing out the capital levy reserve by 2026 if we continue on with this path. But if there's surpluses and we find savings in cost of our projects, that may extend a little longer. Okay. And I think that's all I have within this slide right now. And then we have our reserves and the activities within the reserves on a annual basis. And then your reserve balances for 2022 to 2026. Is there any questions in reserves then?
So really, my only question about the reserves is really forward-looking, really,
Yep.
in that some of them are going to show a shortfall or be closed out. So in future, then, as I don't know when this might come, but will you be helping us with a discussion around, what is it appropriate for us to maybe be funding out of a reserve as opposed to out of a debenture, and how much out of which, and like strategic decisions about how to do that in the future? Okay, thank you. That's all.
And your reserves, and we can establish a reserve policy that will help set the targets that you need in each of those reserves to help your assets, right? I'm a big believer in reserves, but that's, other people may not think so.
The reason I asked the question is I think it's worth us having a fulsome discussion about it,
Yep.
Between staff and council about what should we have reserves for, what shouldn't we, how big should they be versus debenture. I think it's worth us having, an expert opinion and advice on it and deciding, so how much are we willing to tax to fund a reserve? And to me, the best context for that is an asset management plan, that it's not, so it's not just 5 or 6 years, it's, yeah, we bought it and then we're gonna pay for it, but part of paying for it is that in 20 years, we're gonna have to replace it, so.
That's correct.
I'm just, all I'm asking is, we're gonna have that conversation and you're saying yes, so that's all, my question's
Yes.
answered, thank you.
And also, we have to remember that if you have a deficit and you're going into a deficit reserves, where is the funds going to come from? So that means that's also going to be a cash flow issue that you'll have to carry at some point until that's been replenished too. Okay, so, okay. And then also part of this slide presentation is the debenture schedules, and it just shows you the decline in our debenture schedules on the debentures you have set right now within the township, okay? And that you'll see that it does decrease, which is a plus, and that will help with your capital levy at the end, okay? And then this is just a summary of all of the capital expenses over the next 5 years and the revenue sources, and then a detailed report after that on all the activity within the capital budget. Okay, so this is the time I'd bring forward to council to ask, what do you see? Is there any changes that you would like to see in this budget, and how would you like staff to proceed on this budget?
Suggest at this point, if you guys have like individual, you know, specific, like if this wasn't in there, what would it be like or whatever. I think if they're relatively straightforward, we can just ask Diane. If she can do that, she'll bring us back a scenario like that for a future meeting. But if it gets more complicated and we're shuffling stuff around all over the place, then depending on how much work that is, I might ask you for a mover and a seconder before we direct staff to do a whole ton of work. So between Diane and I, we'll kind of judge on the fly how we're going on that. But I would suggest still at this point, just fire out your questions and we'll see each one as we go, whether we think it's a relatively simple direction to staff or complicated, we need a motion. And I'll turn it over to you guys. Katie.
The deficit in the rec reserve is pretty concerning. And when I'm looking at that, I'm also thinking about all of these wonderful, primarily community-funded projects that are coming forward that are not a reflection of what we can actually afford through our taxation. And when we're looking at, you know, putting in these new amenities that we will then be maintaining and replacing when they come through their life cycle, those projects are all happening within that department, and that department is where we don't have enough in our reserves. So that's not a question, that's a comment, but I think that that's something that we really need to get serious about. And I think, I mean, through asset management, we're going to have a better understanding of what, you know, what it's actually going to cost for us to have the level of service that we're having. But community groups are going to keep coming forward with projects. And I think over these past few years for myself, I'm slowly learning that a free thing is not a free thing. So I would like to see possibly some movement in the direction of increasing the amount of funding that's going into rec reserve. I'm not sure how the rest of council feels on that one.
I believe we tried to address that. We brought it up last year at this time, going, ooh, Parks and Rec are going to run out of reserves in 5 years last year. So, yeah, I agree with you.
I got some general comments, and then that'll lead into a couple of things I'd like to throw out for council's consideration to. And honestly, I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at years 2 to 5 on this budget because we've got some big ticket items, some giant balloons in the air over the next few months. We could be selling anywhere from 2 to 5 pieces of property, which could result in several $1 million in revenue. We'll be making a decision on the future of the ZMC, which if we go forward with will be several $1 million in expenditures. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say If we don't go forward with ZMC, we are going to look at some form of infrastructure for daycare and starting a reserve fund for a new township offices in the not too distant future. So I think the capital budget that the new council sees in December will be much different than this one, and that I'm not too concerned about what the numbers say reaching out, because the numbers coming in and going out are going to be so huge between now and the end of the year, it's going to have a big impact. I like a lot of things about this budget. I like the new format. I like the detailed information, especially the panels where you show each department for each year and gives us details of what's coming in and what's going out. I like the inclusion of the revenue from sales of used equipment, so we know that that is a revenue fund that's coming in. I don't believe that was identified in the past as definite numbers. I like the increase in transfer to the fire equipment reserve by $30,000 a year, because I think we were lagging behind in that. And I like the 2% increase per year transfer to all reserves just across the board I think that's a reasonable number at this point. And I like using the reserves to soften the impact of the tax increases, especially in the short term over the next 3 or 4 years, while we still are paying off some significant debt towards the work that was done years ago in Thamesford and Embro for as far as the sewage work. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying this, I think the next 2 or 3 years are really going to be tough times. And Diane said we're at 5.7% inflation, and we haven't seen that since I was a young man, which is quite some time ago. What I don't like about the budget is the 5.5% increase in the tax levy. And so I started going through it to see what, and the reason I don't like it is because I'm afraid of what the operating budget's going to be like as far as an increase, based largely on decisions we've already made as far as increasing remunerations to our staff and increasing staff, at least one staff member. I think we're going to see, and we're also going to see huge increases in some of our operating expenses, especially energy. Steve talked about what we're seeing on the capital side. And really, we don't have a whole lot of discretion when it comes to operating budget. The only way you can chop things out of an operating budget is to reduce services. And I don't think there's any appetite to reduce services. So I started going through the capital budget. Where can we reduce some spending? I looked at roads. Roads are a priority for many of our residents, and they've also been a priority for this council. And over the last 3 years, we've spent millions of dollars on road projects. Road 92, Road 96, Road 88, Line 25, and Line 31. And those are all in my ward. So it's not, I can't come here and say I think we should be chopping road projects just because the road work needs to be done. If it's not in my ward, I support the road project work being done wherever it is. Bridge and building maintenance, if you don't do it when it needs to be done, you delay repairs, they become bigger repairs, or in worst case, they become replacement costs. Equipment replacement, both public works and facilities. We replace our equipment not only on a schedule, but the condition of it. So we're replacing our equipment at optimum time. When it's had a good life, but it's not worn out yet. And if you don't replace it at an optimum time, then you get into higher maintenance costs, and you also get into lack of reliability. And we're in the service industry. So people want their roads plowed today. They want the ice scraped today. They want their facilities open today. And if we get into a point where we're not maintaining and replacing our equipment, we're not going to be able to provide that service. So that left 3 things that I looked at. And the one thing that I don't support us going forward with is the small dog area at Grace Patterson Park, which is budgeted for $19,000. Matt said that there was a number of residents came forward asking for that, but to me, that's, when you look at the big picture of the whole township, that's a very limited percentage of the people that will benefit from that expenditure. And to me, that's something that if those people want that improvement, either go to a service club or do what they've done with a lot of other projects and come to us with some kind of a community-funded operation. I looked at removing the trail from Road 66. I'm backing away from that because of the uncertainty about the what the development charges funding comes into that. But the one that I want to throw out and get response from the rest of council is, I think that we should defer $100,000 of the I think it's $175,000 transfer to SWIFT for this year. And we started that, this would be the 4th year. The selling point on contributing to SWIFT, what we called SWIFT Plus, is what, if we contributed, the county was also contributed, and as long as we contributed, we would be getting a share of the county money coming in. So we would not only have the money that we set aside, but we'd have county money coming in to help us with putting in internet infrastructure. The presentation that we had last meeting left me kind of wondering what role SWIFT was going to play going forward. I think it still has the opportunity to be important, but with the different changes, I got the message that SWIFT is not the big solution that we all thought it was. And we're into the 4th year of this now, and there's been no plan come forward to what we're going to do with this money. It's just sitting there. It's not earning any interest or anything. And at 5.2 or 5.7%, it's actually theoretically worth less than what we put in there. And at $600,000, that's about $30,000 that we've lost just by putting that money aside. So I'm not saying that we should not put any money into SWIFT, but if we're looking at cutting this down, and that would bring us down to, if we were to take out the dog park and the 100,000, that brings us down to a 1.3 increase. And we have a motion coming up later to do with some upgrades to our arenas and also a program for free menstrual products. I don't know what the dollar figures are on those yet, but I think if we bring this down to 1.3, that gives us some wiggle room to consider putting that into the budgets. So those are the two suggestions. Take out the dog park and defer 100,000 for the SWIFT contribution, and see what the rest of council thinks of those thoughts.
Steve?
Not being voracious, but your math, chopping 118 grand out of our budget there is going to drop it from 5.5 to 1.7?
Yeah, we're at, the increase is 154,000. You take 119 out, that's,
Okay.
yep.
I mean, are you able to confirm that number, Diane, or do you want to? I mean, I think probably, are you asking basically at this point, at this point, are you suggesting a motion to remove it from the budget, or that you'd like to see what a budget would look like with it removed? Let me just clarify that first of all.
I would like to see the 19,000 for the dog park removed and the 100,000 for SWIFT deferred. If that requires a motion, I'm willing to make that.
Well, what I'm saying is, do you want to see, are you saying right now I want them out of the budget, or are you saying you want to see what the budget would look like with them out of it?
No, I want them out,
Okay, okay.
because I think it's,
Well, if you want it out,
Yeah.
I think
yeah,
there should be a
the number
motion,
is
for sure.
154,000, we take it
No,
out,
yeah,
it's going
I-
to change that
No,
percentage.
I understand. I just wanted to understand what you were saying,
Yep,
because
no.
if it's take it out, I think that should be a motion to formally actually change the budget. That should be a motion. If it was just, I would like to see what it looks like with it out, that's another matter. So if you want to, you've asked the question, so I would suggest write something up.
Yep.
Question of clarification then, would taking 119,000, which I think is the number that's being talked about here, out, are you able to tell us what that would bring the 5.5 to, or if the answer is no, no is fine.
And just a reminder, that's 5.5 on the capital levy,
Yeah.
not the tax levy.
Yes.
So right now, about 90,000 is 1% on the overall.
On the
levy.
overall.
Overall levy, yes.
So,
Sorry.
So while Paul's writing that and then looking for a seconder, is there any other questions for Diane while he's doing that?
so if we do that, and we're keeping the transfer from capital reserves at the same 432,000, it brings it down to 1.26%. Okay?
Can I ask for clarification on, so when we're removing, in looking at the column for 2022, we're removing an item permanently, Paul is proposing to remove an item permanently. And I understand Paul's philosophy of not looking ahead because there's a lot that's going to impact the budget for next year. Things we're going to potentially spend money on, some new revenue sources with sales of property. By deferring, then the impact on next year's projected 5.5% increase, right? Because it's a 5.5% increase year over year on this 5-year capital. That $100,000 being shifted to next year would really impact that number, right?
Yes, it would increase again. So you're making it up in the next year. Mhm.
Can I ask a question of rec staff? I know it was prior, I think, to your time in Zorra, but do you know how the dog park was funded originally?
There was a fundraising component, but I don't know if it was a full or partial, so I'd have to do some research on that, or the value of which it was fundraised or tax dollars went to it. But I know there was a fundraising component to it.
Okay.
There was a grant from Royal Canin that was, that went towards the project as well.
Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that the $19,000 for the small dog area at Grace Patterson Park be removed from the 2022 capital budget, and that $100,000 be transferred to SWIFT, be deferred until the 2023 capital budget. Paul?
Yeah, I don't think I need to add anything. I just think that we need to cut this out. There's very few things that we can cut out of this budget. And I think those are the one thing that we should cut and one thing we should defer for the reasons that I mentioned earlier.
Steve?
I will bring almost any motion to the table as seconder, but I don't agree with that, and I will not be voting in favor.
Anyone else? Katie?
So from our last council meeting, we had the updated presentation on SWIFT Plus. We had an opportunity to ask questions about the different grant programs from the different levels of government. And we were advised that there may be opportunities where we're wanting to improve our internet services above what funding may become available for us, or whatever the projects are. So I'm definitely in favor of holding on to that reserve, even though it is, in theory, losing some value. But I do see that $175,000 contribution when we don't know what those We have no idea what we're going to get, how we're going to get it, and if we're wanting to upgrade it, what those upgraded costs could be. You know, they could be $20 or they could be 20 million. And so it feels like, because there's been so many changes to this initiative to bring vital infrastructure to all of our residents, it's difficult to put that much money aside as we still don't have that information. I'm in support of considering, to me, removing it even, because we could always put it back in, or deferring it because we could always take it out. I would be interested in considering that, but I'm not feeling in this meeting today any pressure on making that decision, because we have an opportunity to make these changes before we pass the budget and once we've had a chance to see the operating budget. And I'm a little hesitant to, I feel like I have enough of a sense of the impact it's going to have on the percentage increase that I don't need to see those numbers exactly how they would be with it removed. As for the dog park piece, I'd like to see it left in until we know exactly what we're looking at. I don't want to remove it unless we have to remove it. And in part, this comes back to, I had some conversations with staff a few days ago about asset management, and it's haunting me in my dreams. I'm waking up thinking about, and Diane, you're going to be getting some emails and phone calls. I'm going to be looking to get into your office a bit more, because these free projects, so the dog park was fundraised, right? But a lot of dog parks have these for safety, for these small dogs. There's an actual concern in the usage of that dog park because we don't have a partitioned section. So we got a free dog park, but now it's ours to maintain, and it's ours to maintain at whatever level of service that we think is appropriate. And I think it is appropriate for there to be a partitioned section, and that costs $19,000. So I don't want to remove it yet. I'd like to keep it in, and I'd like to consider it as if we absolutely need to, but I do feel like it is our responsibility. And in this discussion, for me, it's a reminder of, we really need to maybe be looking at how many of these really great free projects we're getting in, and how we best benefit from these great community groups that do so much for us in a way that we have the ability to be financially sustainable then with these new assets. So I'm not in favor of this motion, because I feel like in our budget process we will have opportunities to potentially take both of these out. I would consider them, but not at this time.
Anyone else? So I think these are both well worth considering. My personal preference would be to defer it, because I don't want to defeat it today. If it's defeated, then it shouldn't really be coming back. But I think they're well worth considering. So my preference would be that we defer this. We're going to have subsequent budget meetings. There's no reason that this couldn't be deferred to one of those budget meetings and considered at that time. But it's, the motion's on the floor, so somebody would have to make a motion to defer it. But I would suggest that I'm mostly of the mind that I think these are well worth considering. I don't think there's a need to decide today, is my personal view. But it's, Ron?
Yeah, I'll move to defer it, because when Paul, he's done a lot of research on this and made a really good case for both those items. I was having a lot of trouble with both of them as far as the dog park. I think it's a fairly simple project. I think it, we had our time to look at it, or the rec staff had to, that $19,000 might be a pretty high number for that project. Taking $100,000 and deferring that on Swift, that was kind of bothered me a bit too. I agree with you. I think a deferral's a good idea, and we will keep those ideas in front of us as we move forward in this process. And that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I'll second Ron's motion to defer that motion. The object's what's important. It's not necessarily I'm ahead of myself on the process, but we've thrown it out there. We've thrown it out there, a couple of ideas, but I think we do need to to take some money out of this, to keep the tax increase within reason, even though, who knows, by the time we pass this budget, we may be at 8% cost of living increase. And I don't think that that's the kind of, say, well, it's under the cost of living, it's okay. There again, when I was a young man, that's how things worked. And it wasn't a good thing then, and it's not a good thing now. So yeah, I would second the motion to defer, and we'll have a lot more discussion about this.
So then the question becomes, when do we defer it to, which leads to a question I was going to get to later on, which is timeline-wise, when will we be seeing an operational budget, and then what do you see as the next phases? One more meeting after operational to pass it, or?
Yeah, so what my plan is, that my recommendation is to have the operating at the March 23rd meeting to give staff time to get everything together. That's a day meeting, so we'll have a lot more time to discuss. We can have the operating, and then you'll have an idea of what the costs are for operating, and then we can have another meeting either, and I'll discuss this with the clerk, but we were looking at even the next meeting, which is the 1st of April. We could have, it's another day meeting, and then just go right.
First day of April to pass the budget?
I don't think it's April 1st, though. I'm hoping not. Okay.
Okay,
April 6th.
okay,
Okay. So we can have a further discussion on April the 6th, and hopefully we could pass it at that meeting.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. And you think that by that point, we should be, I mean, obviously it's going to be up to council, but provided we don't all clutch our pearls, we could pass it on April 6th. Okay.
That's correct.
So is that, what do you guys want to defer this to then? I need a motion to defer to March 23rd, to April 6th. What do you want? Well, it's up to you guys, really. I mean, that's when we'll have operational,
Yeah.
and you guys could do it then, or you could wait until April 6th, then you've heard capital and you've heard operational, sit on it, digest it, and then do it. It's up to you guys. It's your meetings, it's your budget, so you moved, so April 6th?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So have you guys captured some wording there to defer that to April 6th? Okay, Katie?
So are we potentially passing it on April 6th?
The budget,
The full budget?
yeah.
So would it not be beneficial for us to, if we have the operating budget at March 23rd, we'll have an idea whether or not we want these things removed, so that what's presented to us at April 6th that we would then be passing would already have those changes implemented if we want them?
That's what I thought.
You can, on April 6th, you
Just
can,
in terms of what's presented to us on an agenda and to the public, if those changes, if we're going to be able to make those decisions on the 23rd, then the final draft agenda.
So what I would suggest is, and you by all means correct me if you don't like this, but what I would suggest is that on April 6th, we're going to have a budget presented to us. And council can pass that budget, or say, pass it as amended with stuff removed on the fly on that day, right? Believe me, I've been through it up to here with procedural bylaws and how budgets are passed. And our procedural bylaw is not very restrictive in that respect. Lots of thoughts on that, but I think in a council of 5 who's been pretty respectful of how we all do stuff and everything, I think I'm confident with us doing that, with deferring it to the 6th and saying we're going to have it out on the 6th, and whatever Diane presents to us, we will change, cut, add, whatever, Ron?
And nothing says we can't make a motion on the March 23rd meeting either, if we make that decision then. Absolutely. Right? So it's open. Absolutely. Yeah.
It is your meeting and it is your appointment, so again, as long as we're all respectful of each other and playing nice, I don't see why we can't do that. Well, you laugh, but so motion to defer to April 6th, correct? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Mitchell. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay. Okay. Anything else on budget then? Comments? Nothing? Okay. So I do want to say then, I commented a little bit on this before, but I really agree with Paul that the presentation of this budget is excellent. I really, really liked it a lot. I like that it has a little bit broader scope and a little bit longer term view, and it hints about places we might go in terms of much more future planning, which I'm very excited to see. I think this is a really good step forward for us, in my opinion. I'm very, very happy with it. So I do have then, sorry, let me just straighten this paperwork out here. So this is 8.5A. So I have moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that report 2022-034 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay. I will comment too, Paul, you were saying that maybe you jumped the gun, or I can't remember exactly the term you used in making that change now. I think quite the opposite. I think it's really good if we come forward and sort of stay like clear, transparently, here's what I'm thinking about, and then everybody can put that. I mean, to some extent you're showing your hand, but again, I think, you know, but I mean, if we're not here to win individually, if we're here for residents to win, then I think that's the right way to do it, is to say, look, here's what I'm thinking. Let's all think about that, you know? So I think, yeah. Okay, so then 8.5B, report 2022-029 from the Director of Finance regarding 2021 council expense report. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight in that?
No, there's nothing else that I have to add.
Any questions from council? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2022-09 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And thanks, Diane. 8.6, Corporate Services Department, report 2022-030 from the Deputy Chief Building Official, Municipal Law Enforcement Officer regarding 2021 year-end bylaw summary report. Is Matt still there? There he is. Matt, is there anything you want to highlight in that for council?
I have no comment other than there is a correction on the amount under the 2021 in the charts. The line item under property standards, it has a total of 18. That number should be 3. And under the yard and lot row, there's a total of 20, and that should be 32. Some of the yard and lot complaints were inadvertently added to the property standards column.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Questions from council on that report? Not seeing any, Matt. Thanks for hanging around.
No problem.
Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, the report 2022-030 from the Deputy Chief Building Official, Municipal Law Enforcement Officer, be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And 8.6B, report 2021-031 from the Director of Corporate Services regarding Deputy Mayor information. Karen, is there anything you want to highlight in that report?
No, I don't think there is.
Questions from council? Paul?
Not a question, but I think the motion is that we receive and file, and I think that's the thing to do now. I do have some thoughts where we should go with this, and I would like to work with Karen to come forward with a notice of motion, and I would make it a notice of motion so that it was an agenda and everybody had a chance to see days beforehand what I was thinking, and to do that within the next couple of meetings so we can move forward with this. But I don't think at this point we have any information to. So, as I just did, I'm willing to show my hand.
Anyone else? Katie?
I think the report really just highlights that there's all sorts of different ways to address this. There's no right or wrong way, and it's really what fits your municipality best at that given time. So I definitely have a lot of thoughts in all directions on this one. I think there's pros and cons to any scenario. But I look forward to seeing your notice of motion, and we'll get into it later. Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else? No, I agree. I think it's a great report, but there's a lot in there to chew on and a lot of scenarios to play out and to think about, you know, what it might actually mean when implemented. So, yeah, look forward to that. I do then have moved by Mitchell.
Marcus, sorry. Can I just say, I don't think I listed it in there, but Maggie did a lot of great research for this report for us as well. So we'll include her probably on that discussion that we're going to have. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that report 2022-031 from the Director of Corporate Services be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And pass on our thanks to Maggie for her work on that report. Make sure she knows that just we received and filed it, but because, okay. And 8.6C, report 2022-037 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding ZMCC member resignations. Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in that?
No, there is not.
Questions from council? Steve?
Well, Katie sits with them, I believe. Why so many resignations? Well, or Alicia, I don't.
Well, so let me interject there, perhaps, and say I think really the people you'd have to ask would be Jeff Rustin and Ashley Heron.
Right. Okay.
I would be
that's
wrong.
fine.
I'd not to.
I'm not being nosy.
No, but I'm just saying I would be reluctant to ask either of them to speak on behalf of these people as to why. My personal view would be that this is just further indication that in some ways our committees are not optimal designed to achieve the goal that we've set out for them. Any other questions from council? What I have then is moved by Forbes, seconded by Mitchell, that council accept the resignations of Jeff Rustin and Ashley Heron from the Zorra Multi-Use Courts Committee, and that council pass the necessary bylaw to appoint Darren Whitaker to the Multi-Use Courts Committee, and that council direct staff to advertise for the open vacancy on the Zorra Multi-Use Courts Committee. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And correspondence, no items, boards and committees, 10A. Zorra Community Policing Committee, Resolution 0301-2022, re-ATV ORV Summary Report. So the report is there in the agenda. Is there any questions on it before I read the motion? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that the ZCPC ATV ORV Summary Report be included in the Zorra Now municipal publication. Anybody want to speak to that? Paul?
The police committee came to us a couple meetings ago with 3 or 4 different things, including signage and a public meeting, and we decided that we weren't going to do either of those things, and that we were going to publicize this information in the Zorra Now. So I think this is just a follow-up to that, and we should support having that done.
Just a question. If you guys are able to do this on your own, yeah? Does it really, I mean, I guess they made it as a recommendation to council, so council has to, but really, for instance, if it wasn't a committee, say, it was something else, and they just asked the clerk, could you do this? Would the clerk be able to just make that call?
Yes.
So in fact, this could have, in a different structure, consulting with residents could have actually happened much faster and easier.
That's correct.
Thank you. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I couldn't help it. 11. So what I have is 11. I have a motion here to receive and file 11A through E, but not F, right? Yeah, but not F. So is everybody good with that? Something to do A through E, or does anybody want to pull any out? We're good with that? Okay. So is any, yep, absolutely.
Just on A, just a question for Don. And am I understanding that all they're trying to impact is, the only reason they're appealing this is they want to know whether it should be considered industrial or some other tax bracket. You have any inkling of what they're trying to get at here?
Did you see the correspondence today? Okay, yeah, same. Because we got another email today is the reason I bring it up, and I
Okay.
just skimmed it. I have not read it properly.
Right.
So just to preface that whatever Don says, neither of us has actually read the latest correspondence on it. So
It just seems kind of silly.
we got it this afternoon, like at 4 o'clock or something. So
No, you're off the hook. That's,
Yeah, I'll be able to comment more after I've read the correspondence and also correspond with the treasurer at Wellington County. He's much more knowledgeable about this than I am.
and I apologize, I didn't send that before you, Don. It just kind of came off the top of my, it just seems strange to me, but what it would be classified other than industrial, I don't know what it would be.
it is strange, and that is basically the nature of the appeal. And then, but what's stranger, I think, and the reason that Don wrote the letter is why is impact? But the nature of the response, this one and the one we got today, as I understand it so far anyway, is MPAC is basically saying that they just want to seek clarification. I'll emphasize that's what they're saying right now anyway, so, yeah. The water is still flowing under the bridge at this point. So any other questions on A through E before I read the motion? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that items 11A through E be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 11F. Correspondence from Brian Hutchison regarding Zorra's ORV bylaw. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that staff review bylaw 72-20 to regulate the operation of ATV and ORV motorized snow vehicles within the Township of Zorra and prepare a report for council. Katie, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to speak with Brian on the phone a couple of times about this issue and sort of digging back into the decision that was made by this council just over a year ago. I think there is some areas that we need some clarification on, and it's worth having staff relook into it and bring us back some information. I don't think there's a need for a tight turnaround on this. I think we need to get everything, like, kind of just reopen this, really relook at it, and then have it come back to council.
Ron?
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see this getting reopened and or just at least have a look at it and see where we can take it from here. So we just
I would support us taking another look at this, and I had a good conversation with Mr. Hutchison, and basically what he said in the letter is, I want to be an honest citizen and not lie to the cops when they pull me over. The report that we got on December 15th, which was a follow-up, mentioned that there were northern communities completing a one-year trial where ATVs and off-road vehicles were allowed in some roads. So I would like staff to find out what they found out from those trials, and maybe we can learn something from it.
No, I agree. It might take a second look at it. I honestly don't know what the solution to it is as is. I think Brian said he'd contacted all of us, and I was listening to him, and I couldn't think of a easy solution to it based on what we've already decided, unless something's changed in the greater world or the province.
I guess I have a question and then a comment. So the question is, there's no date on this. That's the one we would hear back. And I'm just wondering, at this point, I would expect that the report we would get back from staff at this point would be largely the same as the report that we got before. Largely. No? Yeah?
There could potentially be some changes
Okay.
that have come out after meeting with the OPP again on this.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question then, would be what information might, whether it would change the recommendation or not, what information might change that, and do we have any kind of idea of a timeline when that might happen? Because while there's no timeline on here, and I'm personally fine with it, I'm comfortable with the decision we made, that it was an informed decision, and it sits there. What I would like is that if we're gonna reconsider it, that there should actually be some new information when we reconsider it. So I'm just curious what that timeline would be like
Yeah.
when we might actually see it back.
Okay, so, yeah, potentially new information, yes, and, I think by the spring. like,
Okay.
Yeah, the conversation's already happening, and there's research is already being done, kind of what Paul's already commented on, so I don't foresee it being a long wait, but,
Okay. Any other questions? So my only comment then before I call the question would be, I personally would not want to see something back sooner. I would rather see it more informed than soon. Because frankly, if we just get it back and there isn't enough to significantly change it, it's not doing the resident that wrote us this any good at all. Right? I would sooner wait 8 or 9 months and get better information. I mean, not, if it comes in the spring, that's great, but to me, it's much more important that it be informed than it be quick. Katie?
That was my intention of not putting a date on it, so that staff have the ability to do what is needed to happen, that it's not a time-sensitive thing, but there are enough areas that have been determined to be a little bit gray that clarification is needed on. There may be some changes that are worth bringing back.
I mean, I would also say to your comment, Steve, this is absolutely, all policy is a compromise. This one is just a huge compromise either way. There is no, aha, now it's all perfect. No matter what we do, it will be compromised. There will be people on one side or the other. That's just the way it's going to be.
That's exactly, to be honest, like when Brian and I were talking, I just separated it out from what we said, and I said, well, if you're doing ag stuff and you own a farm, there's no issue. Well, yeah, but I was on another road. Well, in my mind, right or wrong, I'm going, joyriding is joyriding. Doesn't matter. So that's why I was so confused. That's why I welcome more information.
So we'll move by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that staff review bylaw 72-20 to regulate the operation of ATV and ORV on motorized snow vehicles within the Township of Zorra and prepare a report for council. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And I think what I've got then, Karen, is notices of motion, bylaws, items of community interest, and then down to closed and confirmatory, et cetera. Yeah, okay. So notices of motion, 13A. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Mitchell. Whereas access to free menstrual products addresses both income inequality as well as acknowledges the essential nature of these products, and whereas 3 of 6 change rooms at Tempsford District Recreation Center currently are equipped with a urinal and no toilet, and whereas gender equity in our facilities is achievable, supports our strategic goals, and is an opportunity for Zorra to do our part, therefore be it resolved that staff include the addition of implementing free menstrual products in all female and family universal designated washrooms in Zorra Township owned facilities for the 2022 budget, and that staff prepare a report for the March 2nd council meeting providing options and applicable cost estimates to address the gender inequity in the amenities in our TDRC change rooms, specifically to consider the addition of a bathroom stall with a toilet in the change rooms that currently do not have one, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Oxford County area municipalities for consideration of implementing free menstrual products in their facilities. Katie, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, and just really quick, I know I write long motions, and I don't do it just to make you struggle with them, but I think it's really important to have, you do really well. I'm addressing the little bit of guilt I feel when I make you read this much, but it's so that all of this is documented in there, and that hopefully when residents are looking at this or we look back on it, we have a good understanding of what was happening. So this motion was sparked by 2 things. The first one is Oxford County staff, as part of their zero poverty commitment made by County Council on November 22nd, 2017, brought forth a business plan endorsed by the Oxford County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee to provide free menstrual products in all county-owned, universal/family, and women-designated washrooms. Nonprofit Canadian organizations, such as FemCare, believe that everyone deserves equal access to period products, regardless of their income. When you enter a public washroom, you do not pay for toilet paper. Likewise, FemCare wants to see government subsidies for menstrual hygiene products, not just because they're expensive, but because they are essential. Oxford County is implementing this program in true leadership, and we have a chance to do the same. To gain a better understanding of what the implications of this could look like on our budget, from the Oxford County report, there's 80 washrooms in 41 facilities that were identified for implementation. There is a cost of $21,000 for installation and an additional $2,000 for startup product, with a budget of $8,000 a year to refill the dispensers. I asked Zorra Recreation staff how many washrooms we had that met the same criteria, and 18 were identified. Even rounding up, I rounded up to 20, assuming we might unearth a couple more. But the quick math puts us at approximately a $5,750 startup cost and approximately $2,000 a year moving forward to keep these stocked. The second thing that sparked this motion is that I'm the change room supervisor for my daughter's hockey team of 11 to 12-year-old athletes who just so happen to be girls. We visit many facilities around southwestern Ontario on a regular basis to participate in their chosen sport. A recent visit to the TDRC, the girls came in and went to use the washroom to find that there was no toilet in the change room, just a urinal. This is not the norm and stood out to the team as they had to go through the lobby to use the public washroom. When they returned, I asked, "What do you think about this, about having a urinal and no toilet in here?" And a 12-year-old athlete spoke up and said, "This is sexist." So here we are. Canadian Women in Sport is a national organization dedicated to achieving gender equity in the Canadian sport and physical activity system, and more broadly throughout Canadian society with a focus on women and girls. In a 2020 study by Canadian Women in Sport, which was funded by the Government of Canada, it was found that 1/3 of girls drop out of sport by late teens compared to 1 out of 10 boys, with the following factors as preventing them from participating: low confidence, negative body image, perceived lack of skill, poor perceptions of belonging, and not feeling welcomed. In a follow-up study relating to COVID impact, 1/4 of these girls who do participate in sport said that they didn't see themselves returning post-pandemic, which is just a future loss of girls in sport. Through the data, there's many opportunities for parents, organizations, the media, and coaches to help improve these stats for our girls. The benefits of maximizing the retention of our girls in our sports are endless. But what is our role as a municipality? We provide facilities. And what do our facilities do to help girls feel welcomed and make them feel like they belong, that these facilities are theirs and for them? We have 6 change rooms at our TDRC and 6 change rooms at our Embro Recreation Center. While Embro change rooms all have stalls with toilets in them, the TDRC only has 3 in 6 change rooms. The other 3 have a urinal, a sink, and a double shower. While it is possible to attempt to schedule teams to use the spaces that are best able to provide the amenities of their needs, it's not possible to always do this. If you have 2 back-to-back games of girls hockey, you need to have 4 dressing rooms so that you have the ability to clean the dressing rooms in between. So we need to address this gender inequity for our outdated facility. We can do better. We can do our part. And the last piece of my motion is because I believe strongly in what I'm hoping Zorra is going to do here. And I know that we are all better when we work together. I want to see all municipalities in Oxford County work towards also providing free menstrual products. In Zorra, we do our part, and Oxford County is, growing stronger together. And so every time that we have a great idea in Little Zorra, and we have an opportunity to share that throughout Oxford County, I think that that's our responsibility. Thanks.
Paul is the seconder.
I agreed to second this motion because there are many benefits to young people participating in sports, and Katie alluded to it, many females drop out of sport, especially team sports, when they reach puberty. And if we can upgrade our facilities and provide a product that will keep not only females but also males, males use toilets too, won't go into detail, but if we can do that and keep all youth and especially females, participating in sports, I think we should do it. I think it comes down to being a simple equity issue, both gender-wise and also facility-wise. Katie said the Embro Arena has these facilities, the Thamesford doesn't, so we should update it. I did warn her that once the numbers come in and budget gets considered, I may not support it, but that all depends what we can kick out between now and then. So that's, I think that this is something we should have a report on.
Anyone else? Ron?
It's something that I would have never, I shouldn't say never considered, but just wasn't brought up. And thank you, Katie, for bringing this up. Believe it or not, Thamesford Arena was built when I was a teenager, and there was no girls playing hockey, and we had a great time. The young teenager men in that time, I'm going to use that term lightly, calling ourselves men when we were teenagers, but anyways, yeah, and we enjoyed having the arena right there in our backyard. And then when my kids were old enough to play minor hockey, and I was coaching one of my son's teams, I had one girl on the team, and she dressed in the referee's room, and the referees were dressing in the empty. There was only 4 dressing rooms at that time, and yeah, so now here we are, a few years, another generation later, and yeah, we gotta upgrade that, and I'm Mr. Mitchell, I don't even think it'll get voted out of the budget.
Anyone else? Steve?
No, I think it's the right thing to do, period, short and sweet. That's it.
Anyone else?
I have a question for staff. I had put March 2nd as the date for this report back because I was not fully aware of what our budgeting schedule was going to be, and I was concerned that I wanted council to have an opportunity to consider the report before making further decisions on the budget. Looking at our next budget meeting not being until March 23rd, my question for staff is, would it be beneficial for you to have until March 23rd, because I no longer feel like we need to have it by March 2nd?
I'm going to still make the effort to bring it back for March 2nd, but if I don't feel I can have a fulsome, on the washroom portion, specifically the washroom renovations, just because there is more detail, we've started to contact contractors to try and get estimates on this already. If I don't feel I can have a fulsome report, I'll let you know at that meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I will just say, to me, this is an absolute no-brainer. We don't direct staff to buy toilet paper, so I don't see any difference on that. And with respect to the washrooms, absolutely. Like, I don't know why, you know, like Ron said, though, and it's like pulpit moment here. I mean, this is why you have to have different kinds of people on council, is to point this stuff out, right? Until you experience it, you don't see it, and then it's pointed out to you, and you're like, yeah, there should absolutely be a toilet. That, again, it's like the ramps for mobility, right? Everybody can use the ramp. Don't put in a ramp and stairs. Take out the stairs. Everybody likes a ramp, right? And this is the same thing. So to me, this is an absolute no-brainer. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And I lost the piece of paper, Alicia, that you gave me for this one, but I'm going to read it out from here. I've got it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, moved by, sorry. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to see I have such a controversial notice of motion for my
I'll try
first.
harder next time.
Marcus, it's Marcus's notice of motion, so does anybody else have any questions of him before I read the motion? Seeing no questions. Whereas the Oxford Community Foundation has operated as a nonprofit facilitating grants to local organizations since 2003, therefore it be resolved that Zorra Township Council directs staff to provide the Oxford Community Foundation use of the Thamesford District Recreation Center for the 2022 AGM free of charge. Anybody want to speak to that, Marcus?
Just briefly, as the motion says, they operate as a nonprofit. They rotate this meeting around all of Oxford County. And then they just asked that since they're nonprofit, would somebody provide the facility free of charge? I checked with Matt, and it's not within the scope of his, existing policy that he's able to do that. So I thought the appropriate thing to do is bring it here and let council give that direction. I would suggest that maybe we ask for, at some TBD date, not urgent, could we give staff the scope to do some of those things on their own? I don't know what exactly that would look like, but I just think in some of these cases, it would be appropriate to just say to staff, for certain nonprofits or whatever that we're in partnership with or whatever, I don't know, certain number a year or something, just so that this can just happen without having to go through a hoop jumping process, but that's it.
Any other questions or comments? Steve?
I think we just used the term in the last discussion, no-brainer, so this should be an easy one.
And towards your comment, I think we do have ice allocation policies, and we could tweak that to include this. Just a bit of a policy tweak. Okay. No other questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Motion's passed. And I pass back the.
Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that bylaws 12-22, 13-22, 14-22, 15-22, and 16-22 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And items of community interest. Looking at the calendar. And ZRAC next Tuesday, is that right? Okay. County Council on Wednesday. Yes, that's correct. ZMF tour, why did I have that in there for the 28th? Did we talk about that at some point or something? Delete. And then back here on the 2nd of March. I think that's all I'm showing, Paul.
HACA moved their meeting to next Monday. Apparently there are a lot of romantic people in Harrington that didn't want to go to a meeting on Valentine's Day.
All right, so they moved it to the, I'm just going to change that here. They changed it to the 21st. Is that right? Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Items of community interest? Katie?
Next Monday is Family Day. So I guess they like love more than they romance over family.
Well, one before the other, I think, right?
The Lions, the Thamesford Lions have put together a bit of an event. I think there's some virtual components. There's some scavenger hunt pieces. So they have their information available through Facebook. I think it was just released a couple days ago, and I know that for some of the events there's sort of some registration to get involved. So lots of great things. Again, community groups who are still finding ways of doing things during a pandemic, super appreciated.
Anybody else? Anything? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that council move into closed meeting session at 8:29 p.m. pursuant to section 239.2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees regarding leave of absence request, and section 239.2C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board regarding a Thamesford property. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried. Alicia? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that the old fire hall on Allen Street, Thamesford, is hereby declared surplus to the needs of the municipality, and that the chief administrative officer be directed to prepare and circulate a request for proposal for redevelopment of the property. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Confirmatory and adjournment, Karen? You're good? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that the bylaw 17-22, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held February 16th, 2022, be read a first, second, and third time this February 16th, 2022, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that this meeting of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 9:06 p.m. and the next meeting of council be called for March 2nd, 2022 at 9 a.m. in the council chambers at the Township Municipal Office. All those in favor?